Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Second Party Podcast. Recently, a new Christopher Nolan film has been touted, potentially his best yet by many, and we went to see it in the theaters. It's called Oppenheimer, and I thought it was pretty good. A little bit different than I thought it was going to be going into it, but I definitely think it lived up to the hype. I would say it's an aptly named movie.
Well, yeah. The whole movie is about the one guy.
Yeah, it's about Oppenheimer, not necessarily about, yeah.
Or the atomic bomb.
Yeah. It's about him.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think it's aptly named. But with that being said,
a lot of people didn't catch that, by the way. Like, a lot of people were upset that it wasn't more about World War II or, like, the implications in Japan and all these things. And it's like, that's not what the movie was about. It was about him, the person. It was like a character study, basically.
Yeah, I agree. And I thought that was interesting and honestly a kind of refreshing take on a kind of historical film where we are talking about an event, a technology, but we're doing it through the lens of one particular character, one individual, right? And his impact. And it makes sense to choose Oppenheimer as he's kind of colloquially named the father of the atomic bomb. So it makes sense to examine, at least in part, the bomb through his life. But I think, interestingly enough, I almost think that the bomb itself, or the idea of it, in that film can, in a way, be seen as a character, in that it's driving things forward, it's having a real and emotional effect on people and events. That specific technology.
Okay. I don't know what you mean, like, it's a character. Okay. I don't know where you're going with that, but...
Well, I guess I think sometimes we too often see things in life or in story as being in one of two camps. It's either A, kind of nature, just the way that things are, or B, you have people, you have characters who are enacting change on things.
Okay.
And it's in this very active fashion. And I think that technology, in the case of Oppenheimer, we're looking at, say, the atomic bomb, is a kind of interesting synergy between those two camps. Because in one sense it's changing and it's adapting over time, and because of that it has this kind of personality almost to it. And there's kind of a duality, because all technology could be used for good or used for evil, and all people can do good and can do evil. But then on the other side, it's like it's not controllable or able to be pinpointed necessarily in the same way that a person, a character, would be able to be.
Okay.
I think it stands at kind of like this weird precipice, and I think we oftentimes kind of downplay the character element of technology, of its kind of transformative role.
Is part of it that you're seeing it as almost like technology or technological advancements like has a mind of its own? Because when I think about
almost
like a character versus something else, it's like something that is conscious, that is able to make decisions and think about things. Like that's a character in a story.
Yeah, I guess I'm just thinking like
you're a person of some kind.
Yeah, but like
autonomy
in stories you have, like, they'll use terms of how many dimensions does a character have, right? We'll say, oh, that's a very one-dimensional character. That's someone who's just in the background, doesn't enact or affect change really. And versus a three-dimensional character is someone who's enacting a bunch of change. They're pushing things forward. They're developing the plot, right? They're a force for movement and change in the story. And I think we should maybe be viewing technology more like that as a character and less like just this thing external to us. Because
Technology in the real world or in movies?
in how we understand narrative, so kind of both. And I think that you can see that to a degree in Oppenheimer, because while Oppenheimer has a certain mentality about things and he tries to push for, one thing or another, there's also this very tangible thing where the bomb almost enacts a bunch of change as well. And
Well, there's a whole underlying narrative in the movie. I won't spoil things, I don't think, but of this technology, this bomb
mm-hmm.
is going to happen. Like,
yeah,
it's like it has a
yes,
mind of its own almost. Like the
like it's going to be
technology,
born.
the technology is coming, and so
Mm-hmm.
part of what they're doing in the movie is it's kind of like a race to who can make it first.
Yeah.
But there's this moral dilemma of like, this isn't it isn't something we can just not do at this point. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
going to happen, but we need to
Yeah.
be the ones to do it. So are you saying in that sense it's almost like the technology has this mind of its own, or almost like a consciousness
Yeah.
in the sense of what you'd usually think a character, because even a one-dimensional character, we call them a character because it's an entity, a being
Mm-hmm.
with a consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So is what you're saying that like in that movie it's almost like that technology has this mind of its own, it has this autonomy to it
Yes.
where we're not fully
In control.
in control of it
Yeah.
or bringing it about. It's like
Mm-hmm.
it's going to happen and we're trying to like go with it kind of.
Yeah. I like the way that you characterized it, which is there's an inevitability to an atomic bomb coming to fruition, right? And I almost see that like a baby that's conceived. It's like this kid's gonna come out. It's a question of only when and then what happens after that, right? And it's almost like all of these countries and all of these individuals are vying to be the person who delivers that baby, who brings that technology into
Yeah.
the real world. It's and to your point, there's an inevitability to it and something where it does seem to have a mind of its own. And you see that kind of almost birth in Oppenheimer, but you also see that going forward. Like it plays this highly instrumental role in how politics are enacted and how things develop and change over time. I mean, and I would argue more so than any individual person, more than any singular president, let's say.
Yeah. Maybe another example is even just if you look throughout history at scientific discoveries and advancements, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like people credit Benjamin Franklin with discovering electricity, right?
Sure. Yeah.
But electricity was going to be discovered, right? Like if it wasn't X or Y person, it would have been someone else. And we see this with like there are certain things where this person in Germany discovered this or had this mathematical theory or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But then completely independently someone over in Asia also does, but they maybe think about it slightly differently.
Yeah. And almost like coincidentally, these things happen around the same time despite these individuals not being in contact. Like this is before you have communication between even those two parts of the world, and yet we look back at human anthropology and curiously language
These
or numbers and things
points in time are when things are developed, and it's almost like there's a conscious mind behind the discovery of science and technology.
Yeah.
Like,
An
I guess
inevitability to it.
what I'm trying to say is the person that we credit with certain scientific findings,
Mm-hmm.
they're just the person who got it first, right?
Yeah, I mean, I
For the
guess
most part.
something I would say is some technologies seem to be more inevitable than others.
Yeah, maybe there's a difference between like a technology that we develop and like
Like a
a
breakthrough.
discovery, like a scientific
Yeah.
discovery. Like we didn't develop the atom, but we discovered it. We
Yeah.
maybe developed theories around it and ways of
I,
analyzing it, but
I guess I'm just thinking like, okay, if we're looking at technology specifically, you could argue that the electric car is a new type of technology, right? We're bringing all of these things together in a unique enough fashion that didn't really exist, at least in mass market previously, enough to where you can characterize it as something on its own. But the difference between that and what maybe existed, or like a hybrid vehicle, is pretty minimal in comparison to like what Pythagoras or Galileo were doing way back when, right? Like it those are much larger leaps. But I think maybe electric cars are another good example of this, where there's kind of an inevitability there, and it's more a question of timing and who gets the jump and who has that first mover advantage.
I feel like that's how it's been for the past couple decades, maybe like 15 years or something with electric cars, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
the people who are on top of technology and where it's going, we all know that that's where the future of cars is going,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We've all been watching and waiting for that to happen. We still are, right? We're still in the middle of it. But we were waiting for kind of like who's going to be the one that really kickstarts that.
well, it's almost like, how do you take it, and this is the same thing with the atomic bomb, how do you take it from this is possible in principle to here's how to implement it and here's how we did, right? Because the theory behind
Yeah.
the atomic bomb, like, you can look that up on Wikipedia. Bang, it's very simple. It's unbelievably straightforward, actually. Like,
Mm-hmm.
almost as straightforward as like combustion. Okay.
Yeah.
But how do you get that to
Yeah.
occur? That's the
Maybe
complicated
that's
step.
the difference between just having a scientific discovery, right?
Hmm.
And then actually developing the technology out of that.
Yeah.
Like we knew about the atom and we knew about nuclear energy,
Hmm.
but turning that into a nuclear weapon, that's what the race was for
Hmm.
in during World War II.
So here's a question then. Once the theory is developed, once we understand in principle how that something could occur, between that point and now this thing has been made manifest. And maybe this sounds like a weird question, or the phrasing is odd, but like, who's in control? Who's leading who here? Because I think while you can sit here and say Oppenheimer is working on this thing and bringing it into fruition, I almost feel as though you could just as easily characterize it as this thing is using Oppenheimer, or whomever the inventor is of whatever the breakthrough technology is, to bring itself to fruition.
I mean, if you want to personify the technology in that way from like a narrative standpoint, I think you could because of the inevitability you're saying.
Yeah, well, and then here's another question then. If you create something that you can't fully control, to me that's evidence of it leading you, not you leading it. Does that make sense?
Maybe.
Like, if we're so far behind that we don't understand what it is that we're making, that where we can't control it, where we can't harness it, at least to some degree, are we really the ones in control of this thing anymore? Because you could say, like, okay, I throw a rock from the top of a mountain and it starts an avalanche. Am I in control of that avalanche? Well, once I've thrown that rock, no. But I've created it. I've caused that avalanche to occur. But you'd never characterize me in control of the avalanche once it starts. You would never say that. But we kind of do the same thing when we're talking about some of these things with technology, where we go, oh yeah, like we created that, we led that into being, and it's like I'm not so sure if you don't have control of it afterwards.
Like AI.
Yeah, so then that was going to be my next question, because we've kind of been looking into the past up till this point, but that at least to some degree begs the question about some of these things going into the future. At what point does the thing that you're creating be so outside of your control that it's more effective to characterize it as something in and of itself? And that's different than something having a consciousness, because I'm also characterizing the nuclear bomb as a character, let's say.
A conscious being, in quotes. Quote unquote conscious entity.
But yeah, you look back at the nuclear bomb and just the fact that was a thing, and then Russia gets that intel. Once we've brought it into being, it seems to perforate, and many seem to get knowledge of this, and it's through that so many of the follow-up events emerge. Like, the reason we had the Cold War was because the nuclear bomb was a thing. The reason that North Korea is a country and there's not a united Korean peninsula, let's say, is because the nuclear bomb was a thing. Without the nuclear bomb being on the landscape, in the narrative, none of those things would have taken place, and it seems to move around and affect change more like a person would.
I think you could personify it like that if you want to. I mean, with AI, right, or like smart computers kind of thing, the whole fear around computers taking over the world and AI, all these things, that's been around for several decades at this point, right? I mean, that's what Terminator is.
Well, I mean, you could even go
The Matrix.
You can even go back so far as to computers before we had like real transistors. Like Alan Turing was writing and hypothesizing about the Turing test, and that's when computers are larger than rooms.
Yeah.
Where they're analog still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that's a new fear or consideration that humans have had about this specific type of technology, computers, and I mean AI is like an extension of that. Computers was really the first big thing.
I wouldn't characterize them as the same thing, just like I wouldn't characterize an engine the same as combustion.
I'm not saying it's the same thing. I'm saying the pathway towards AI started with the computer.
Sure, yeah. Those are the building blocks for it, certainly.
And the fears people have about AI today started with fears about computers.
Yeah, I agree. I think maybe what I would say is the sled starts pulling away from us, right? Where we're no longer in control of it when we no longer understand fully. Because understanding something is key to being able to wield it.
Yeah, like we're messing with things beyond our capacity to control or understand.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we do that a lot with like genetic engineering, these kinds of things.
Yeah, that's another great example.
Like, I don't know.
You're in over your head a bit.
Yeah, we don't really know what we're doing. I saw some headline the other day that was like, I don't even know what it was. Like scientists created some embryo in a lab of like something with some human DNA and something else, and they're like they don't know what it is or whatever, and it's
Nope, don't like that.
it's
Nope.
just like
Nope.
let's not.
Don't do that.
I don't think anybody needs this.
Yeah.
But part of the like tying it back to your point before, if we're talking about this weird genetic engineering and cloning and whatever, mm-hmm. It's kind of like once we theorized how this could happen, can it be stopped?
Yeah, it's almost inevitable.
There's going to be someone who's going to be out there trying to do this, right?
Curious enough.
Like I don't think you can just pump the brakes on this now. Now that we've gotten a glimpse of what might be possible, like you can't stop it. Someone's going to be going down that path.
Yeah.
Right. Lab grown meat. Of course there are going to be people doing this. No one wants it. No one needs it. It's going to happen though.
You know, this kind of reminded me of a line in the movie Arrival. Mm-hmm. So these aliens are coming to Earth, and a linguistics professor of sorts is attempting to communicate with them, and at some point there's some kind of miscommunication, and she says something to the effect of, any tool is also a weapon, and the only difference between a tool and a weapon is its specific use case. It's what it's used as, right? Like tool has this kind of underlying productive or positive connotation with it, and weapon has the negative.
Yeah.
But like a tool could also be used for evil as well. It's just...
Yeah. You can make a religious analogy here too.
Okay, like what?
Well, I'm just saying the idea about sin and the nature of good and evil, right?
Oh,
like,
okay, sure.
In order to make something that is a tool to be used for good, like there's naturally the possibility it can be used for evil also.
Yeah, there must be some capacity. Yeah. I almost feel like maybe this is where... I don't know that this ties in super well to the religious side of things, but I feel like a prerequisite for using a tool for productive means is an understanding of it.
Yeah.
Because if you
don't
think,
know
like,
how to use it properly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you just think like fundamentally with entropy, like things tend toward chaos. Mm-hmm. The likelihood that your tool is going to be misused is almost definitionally true. Like that's the default state. If we don't understand a tool, we can't properly constrain and use it. Like it's going to come out and bite us.
Yeah, this is why, OSHA has their stuff. This is why there's training regulations and training manuals on things that can be dangerous. This is why we don't give a chainsaw to a baby.
Yeah. Well, and using a tool for productive means, if you think of the infinite gamut of ways that one could use something, the correct and productive set is very small and arguably finite. Mm-hmm. And the set of all of the ways one could misuse it is infinite.
Yeah.
I think it's for this reason that AI really scares me.
Because we don't understand it.
Because we don't understand it, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
and it appears
some
to be
degree,
real powerful. Like, this is not a trivial tool.
To some degree, though, whenever you're developing new technology, like, you don't start with a complete understanding of it. But I think you have to be intentional about not letting it get beyond your understanding, maybe, as you're working through the development.
Yeah, but I guess what I would say in response to that is, like, most of the time you would take baby steps towards something. You wouldn't just throw open Pandora's box, right? Like, if we're trying to understand combustion, we're not gonna play around in a dry forest with a flamethrower. right? We're going to start on like a metal table in a well ventilated area with some scraps of paper and a lighter,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's going to be this highly constrained thing. We're not just going to start whipping stuff together. And that latter mentality is what humanity seems to be doing.
With AI, you're saying?
Yeah.
Oh.
And that's concerning to me, especially with AI, because maybe fire is like a reasonable analogy if it's in like a dry field, because it's this like exponential function, something that just like rapidly accelerates.
Machine learning kind of thing.
Yeah. And we have to be able
Yeah.
to have some understanding before we use it to productive ends.
Yeah. I mean, this is a very common cliche kind of fear, right? How many movies have been made about AI that goes off the rails? Is we don't know what we've created. It turns against us. It's very common cliche, right? I think there's something that a lot of people recognize fear in that.
Yeah.
The other thing I'm thinking about, when you're talking about a tool and it can be used for good or evil, I think you said this before, but you kind of made the case that in principle, any kind of technology or discovery we make can be used in a good way. Like it can have a good functional purpose.
I made a religious argument like that, but yeah.
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 I'm pulling it too. Sorry. I'm like a religious magnet. I always tend towards making religious ties into things.
Did we talk about that on the podcast?
No, I think you tweeted about it.
Oh, okay.
Or something. Maybe.
I tweeted about
That's
it.
why
that sounds
I was
right.
thinking about it because I just feel like that's kind of what you were saying, right? Like any technology that we find, there has to be some way it can be used for good. Like you're kind of making this like religious appeal. Like if God has bestowed a certain type of technology or physical capability
Mm-hmm.
within the natural world, there must be some good purpose for it. But
yeah,
there might be a million ways it can be used wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Like nuclear energy, there's a lot of really good things that can be done with that. It's obviously very dangerous too, and it can be used for a lot of destructive, horrible things too. But when we were talking about, tool being used for good, and maybe that good is just a little sliver, it's the purpose we have to find for that. The specific purpose it was designed for. And then there can be a plethora of other bad things that it can be used for.
Yeah. So I found the tweet that you were referencing. I tweeted, hypothesis. Every technology/ability that man has can, in principle, be used for good. And then the rationale that I provided was Romans 8:28. I say, God is good. He gives us life. The fact that we're alive says there is some good that can come from it. And then I kind of generalize that and say, if God gives us something, there is some good that can come of it. To give a couple more examples, I think your nuclear one was good, but I added, if we have weed. If we use it to get high, this is wrong. If we use it to treat epilepsy, this is good. We can kill. If we murder, this is wrong. If we use this to remove the most evil and vile from society and protect the innocent, this is good. We can modify genes. If we use this on humans, it is wrong. If we selectively use it on plants and do so thoughtfully, we can feed millions. This is good. And then I conclude with your apt nuclear example. If we have an understanding of nuclear energy. If we murder millions, this is bad. If we power millions of homes, this is good. And to your point, I think maybe if we focus more on how could this be used for productive ends, that may be more productive than only considering the negative side of things.
Or just jumping into something we don't understand and being like,
Yeah.
hey, let's play God and see what we can do with this. Like
Yeah.
that's what makes me the most nervous.
Yeah.
Right? Is like messing with things that we don't have a right for. Like I know that's like a religious appeal, but that we don't have a right to mess with. Like, I don't think
Okay,
we have a
that's
right to mess with trying to artificially create new humans.
well. Okay, let me expand on that a little bit more.
Genetically clone human. I don't know. I don't think we have a right.
I agree with
That's a
that,
religious appeal, and I understand that, but
but let's back up for a sec because I think you make a great point there. The right, though, I want to extend it a bit further. So, I've seen, and this is something that frequently happens. People will come into money. Maybe it's an inheritance. Maybe it's they're winning the lottery. They come into a lot of money all of a sudden, though, and they don't know how to handle it. Right? They're thrown in the deep end. They didn't wade in slowly. Okay, and one of the things that they'll characteristically do, and this is kind of like a microcosm for the broader thing, is they'll go out and buy like a really fast, really expensive car or motorcycle. Okay. And the problem with them going out and buying a really fast, expensive car or motorcycle is they haven't taken the steps walking up to that. Like, you don't want to start out and jump into a Dodge Demon. That's not something that you're going to be able to control. What you want to do is you want to start with a normal car and then get something slightly more sporty and kind of walk yourself up the rungs of the ladder. And your driving abilities kind of pace with the abilities of the car that you're driving, right? Or the same thing with like a bike. You don't want to hop on as your first motorcycle a Hayabusa.
I don't know what these things are. But okay.
They're very high powered
I
versions that are difficult to control as a general statement. And I think the same can be said for a lot of these technologies. Like, it's not necessarily wrong to do something with genes, but you need to gain an understanding and kind of slowly walk it up so that you don't find yourself in these situations where you shouldn't be, to your point. Right? Like,
Yeah.
if you're doing 180 in the winter on drag slicks, like, you should never be in a situation like that. And if you had slowly walked up, you never would have put yourself in that type of situation.
It's interesting when you start talking about the ethics of science, though, because I think it gets muddy really fast when not everyone's going to agree on what is and isn't ethical.
Mm-hmm.
To some degree, I think most people, there's something within their soul that looks at, hey, let's clone a human, and goes, I don't know. And I don't know that everyone can explain where that's from or why we kind of share that hesitancy. But I don't know. I'm not super optimistic about people being ethical with their scientific abilities and technology, because I don't know how we can agree on universal ethics of things easily.
Well, and
when we're not taking a like more religious basis, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And I mean, to what we were talking about earlier, once the cat's out of the bag,
it's gonna happen.
You would need a unanimous consensus on something,
right?
So that
now, like, practically speaking, it could not happen, right? If every single human on planet Earth decided, like, now and forever decided no.
Yeah, like, the problem is you get 0.0001%.
We have the power to, technically speaking, we have the power to stop it, right?
Yeah.
Because we're in control of what we do or don't investigate and develop to a degree. But realistically speaking, all it takes is a few people who decide, no, I'm going to do it. And it's going to happen then.
So if we come to the conclusion that controlling how a technology is used in that way doesn't work, how do you control a technology then?
I don't know.
Okay,
I think that all we can do is just continue to be afraid and make cool movies about it.
But that's the cool movies, and be afraid are like trying to get more people into that first mentality of, okay, well, we just won't. to me that's to like minimal ends. It like
I was making a joke.
It's not gonna.
But...
Well, okay, I'm taking your comments hyper seriously as always. Then.
Yeah.
So here's a thought, and I don't entirely know how this goes into practice, but I want to continue with an analogy I kind of mentioned earlier with on the car side of things. So a little while back, two large, very expensive car companies, Koenigsegg and Bugatti, were kind of vying for who had the fastest car, like top speed. Okay. And they filmed their top speed runs and then posted them so people could see them to get hype for their brands and whatnot. Okay. So Bugatti went first, and then they got beat out by Koenigsegg. But here's a question. How do you film the fastest car? A car at its top speed, the fastest one. How do you film it?
What do you mean? How do you film it? What do you follow it in? Or
yeah.
Point the camera?
Yeah.
Helicopter.
A helicopter. Okay.
I don't know.
What if that's not the type of shot you want? What if you want a shot like right next to it?
You need another one of the same car.
Okay. We've talked about this before, so you do know
really?
the answer. But yeah.
I don't remember talking about this at all.
We've talked about it before.
I literally have no idea where you're going.
Okay. So in the Bugatti video, they film it with another Bugatti, another one of the same car. So they had two. One happens to have a camera, and it starts a half second ahead or a quarter second or whatever so that it's out in front. And then the other one's the one being filmed. Okay. And Koenigsegg, yeah, they use helicopters and planes and drones.
Oh, not another one.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. But it illustrates the two, in my mind, the two main categories of how you would go about filming something like that. Something on the fringes. And I almost feel like we can apply this same kind of thing to a technology. Like, how do you keep up with, how do you, to a degree, control and constrain something that's like on the bleeding edges? And there are two answers. One, with the bleeding edges themselves, or two, with something wholly outside of what you're doing.
So with AI, we develop an AI that's gonna police the AI we develop.
I'm not.
That's what.
I don't know
that's
how.
That's what you're proposing.
Well,
we create.
I don't know.
An AI,
it's not the worst proposal.
AI police.
It's not the worst proposal. I don't have a great answer for exactly how it practically works with AI. I would need to do a lot more thinking, but I mean that's how nuclear stuff works. What constrains the use of nuclear weapons?
The fact that other people have nuclear weapons too.
Yeah. Now it seems crude. It seems dark, this mutually assured destruction looming on the horizon. Fight fire with fire.
The Cold War.
Yeah. But it worked and has worked.
I mean, depending on your definition of work. But yeah. I mean, we have not long...
nukes have gone off in...
Yeah.
Like, to kill people.
They haven't been used, like, in war since...
Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right, yeah.
Those are the only two times.
Yeah.
Where they have been directly used in a conflict, not just for testing.
Yeah.
There's something to be said for, like, fighting fire with fire. I mean, it's the deterrent of fighting fire with fire.
Fighting fire with the threat of fire.
Yeah. Like, that does seem to work. Like, the way you shoot a Bugatti doing a top speed run is with another Bugatti. I don't know. It's kind of a crude solution, but until you have the more sophisticated version where you step outside of that paradigm and you do or have something greater, that's kind of where we're at. But then what happens is now the goalpost just moved and it's doing that something greater with something greater.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know how that applies to AI specifically, but it does seem to have worked, however crude, for nuclear weapons. And while it may not be an ideal solution, it seems to have been a functional one.
Yeah, I mean, how many times throughout history has humanity been just terrified of looming world destruction to nuclear weapons? Right? That's one of the big moral dilemmas in Oppenheimer
Mm-hmm.
is like, oh my gosh, like what have we made? Where is the world going? I'm terrified,
Yeah.
kind of thing. And there's a lot wrong in the world, but we have not nuked the planet to smithereens yet.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
it could be worse.
arguably the movie kind of ends on a similar note to where we've ended here, which is you have two factions, one that says, "Oh, well, we should just stop here and everyone can have these and maybe we should stop building them and this is enough." And then another that says, "No, actually the way this is constrained is by continuing to go bigger." Right? That's the question trying to get a hydrogen bomb that you're kind of left with at the end of Oppenheimer.
Oh, don't spoil the movie.
Don't spoil the movie
Based on historical
based
events.
on the major historical events. And
Yeah,
okay,
I know.
yeah.
I need to watch that movie again because there was a lot I didn't pick up watching it in the theater the first time.
Yeah. I don't know, I just think with this, there is something to be said for some of these questions about how far we're pushing things and how we get those things. Jordan Peterson said something to the effect of, beware of unearned knowledge. He was kind of talking about this in the realm of like drugs and mushrooms and stuff. But I do think it kind of applies as well to some of these technological discoveries where when they're on the bleeding edge, when they just kind of fall in our laps, it maybe should be something that we're a little bit more wary of, because it's not necessarily always a blessing. I hope that we can find a reasonable solution to, well, the AI side of things and the nuclear side, because...
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I say we keep making awesome movies like
Yeah.
The Matrix and Ex Machina.
Yeah.
That's my solution.
Well, maybe...
Make more good movies for me to watch and then be terrified sleeping at night.
I think they probably play a role in the solution, actually, now that I'm thinking about it a little bit further, because at the end of the day, what are the movies doing? They're reminding us of the potential for fire and for meeting fire with fire.
Movies have a lot of power in the culture.
Yeah. I think that was probably part of Nolan's vision with the movie as well.
Yeah.
To illustrate what that looks like, literally and figuratively. Well, with that, it's getting late. But recently I've been thinking about things that are engineered in kind of like an expressly unproductive way so that they still mimic something that people are used to. Like sometimes engineers have to work something into a product for the masses. And oftentimes it's so that those masses understand something. So for instance, kind of a low-level example of this is like skeuomorphic design. So skeuomorphic design is where you take something that's digital that could really be anything, but you make it look like something in the physical world so that people have a good innate understanding of that thing. A notes app looks like a traditional notepad that everyone's used to. Or kind of a quintessential example is the save button is a little icon for a floppy disk. Now that one's kind of outdated, but you know, the sentiment holds. And I think from an engineering perspective, it's actually really frustrating because oftentimes engineers have to spend a lot of time working on these features just to make the thing actually worse. So for instance, a lot of times CVTs, so that's continuously variable transmissions, are programmed to simulate gears. So they go to a set thing so it seems like it's a traditional automatic transmission because that's what people are used to. But when you do that, it's actually less efficient. So they're trading efficiency for that old school type of feeling instead of just ushering people into a new era, right? Like the same kind of thing is true with creep mode on EVs. So when you let off the gas, the car just slowly creeps forward. This was almost like a bug of sorts in automatic transmissions, but now it's having to be incorporated as a feature in EVs because that's what people are used to. Another thing with EVs is push button starts or sounds. Manufacturers are spending tons of money trying to engineer a specific whooshing or acceleration sound so that people have that feeling, because that's what they're used to in gas-powered cars, or pushing the button so that you feel and know that it's on, even though it always is on to some degree. Maybe a less extreme or annoying example is something like phone sounds, so the little keyboard click or the little shutter when you capture a picture, or the sleep click. Like all of these things are done because A, that's how it always was, and B, I guess it does provide some amount of information. But something like, paddle shifters on a CVT car, so many of these things we spend time as engineers trying to make something feel like a previous version at the expense of something else. Not just the time and R&D dollars that go into it, but there are actually benefits to not having these things. Like the click of a shutter, sometimes that's a bug, actually. If you're trying to take pictures and you don't want a bunch of sound, right? You're photographing nature, you're at a sports game or something, you don't need a bunch of clicks all the time. I wish as an engineer we didn't have to spend time on stupid things like this. Sometimes it's just kind of maddening. I wish we could just usher people into a new era and not have to spend all that engineering time. But that's just what I've been musing about recently. If you have any thoughts on new technologies or how we have to integrate old school features to nerf new technologies, feel free to send us an email at secondpartypodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. With that, thank you again for listening, and have a good night.